I used to think bad days came in small ways: spilled coffee, a flat tire, a late paycheck. I didn't know a bad day could mean the one that nearly ends you. That night in Portland, Oregon, I learned what it means to stand on the edge of life and look down at the dark water below, wondering whether you'll ever climb back out again. It was a Friday in late October, one of those gray, wet evenings when the sky feels too heavy for its own good. I had just finished my shift at Mason's Diner, where I'd been working for almost 3 years. My uniform smelled of fried onions and coffee, my feet hurt, and my tips, $27 and some coins, were stuffed into my apron pocket. I remember glancing at the cash and thinking how it might stretch through the weekend if I skipped breakfast. I was saving for a new car battery, maybe $180, which sounded like a fortune to me back then. My old Chevy Malibu, silver and stubborn, coughed every time it started. The rain had been coming down for hours, soaking the streets until they looked like mirrors. I rolled down the window a crack just to let the air in, that clean smell of rain and pine mixing with a faint scent of gasoline. I was tired, but a good kind of tired, the kind that makes you feel like you've earned your sleep. The roads were mostly empty, just a few cars moving slowly through the city lights. I remember humming along to a song on the radio, something old and easy, and thinking how peaceful everything seemed. The peace shattered in half a second. A blur of headlights came from the right. There was no time to think, no time to breathe. The sound of screeching tires sliced through the night, followed by the crash, metal folding into metal, glass exploding, my body weightless and helpless as the world spun sideways. I didn't scream. I couldn't. It was like every sound got swallowed by the collision. My chest slammed into the steering wheel, my head hit the window, and then there was nothing, just black. When I opened my eyes, everything was blue light. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and wet pavement. I could hear voices, panicked, distant, and a siren that sounded both close and far away. Someone was calling my name, though I couldn't tell who. My body wouldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of stone. "Stay with us," a voice said, firm and steady. I turned my head, or thought I did, and saw the outline of a paramedic, a man in a reflective jacket. His name tag said Miller, I think. He was shining a light in my eyes. "You're going to be okay," he said. I wanted to believe him, but I could taste blood in my mouth. They pulled me out of the wreck, laid me on a stretcher, and loaded me into the ambulance. The sound of rain on the roof was like 1,000 tiny hammers. My head was throbbing, my hands shaking, and all I could think about was how Mom used to tell me, "You drive too fast, Lily." That's my name, Lily Carter. I wish I could say she was wrong, but that night, it wasn't me speeding. It was someone else, a truck driver, drunk and careless, who ran the red light and disappeared before the police arrived. The ambulance felt like a tunnel of white light and pain. A nurse named Caroline held my wrist, checking my pulse, talking to me to keep me awake. "Do you know where you are?" she asked. "Portland," I whispered. "I think." "That's right," she said gently. "You're going to St. Mary's. Just hang in there." I don't remember much after that. Only flashes. The smell of antiseptic. The sting of needles. A doctor's voice saying concussion, fractured ribs, internal bleeding. At some point, someone asked if there was family they should call. Through cracked lips, I gave them my parents' number, Denver, Colorado, area code 303. My hands were trembling so badly, I could barely form the numbers. Hours later, after the surgery, after the morphine dulled the pain to something almost distant, the nurse told me she'd reached them. I was relieved until I heard what they said. "They're on a cruise in the Caribbean," she said softly, eyes uncertain. "Your mother picked up," she said. The nurse hesitated, looking down at her clipboard. "Go on," I said. She said, and I quote, "We're cruising. Good if that freeloader finally disappeared." And then she hung up. I didn't cry. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling tiles above my bed. It was strange. I felt more hollow than hurt. The nurse apologized like it was her fault. She even patted my hand, saying maybe my mom didn't mean it. But I knew she did. That was her voice, her tone, that cold distance that always made me feel like a stranger in my own family. When the police came to take my statement, I could barely focus. Officer Raymond Lopez, kind-eyed and patient, said they were still looking for the truck driver. "You're lucky, Miss Carter," he said. "Most people don't walk away from something like that." "I didn't walk away," I said quietly. "I got dragged away." He smiled a little at that, but his eyes showed pity. I hated that look. I didn't want to be someone people pitied. I wanted to be someone who mattered, someone who didn't get hung up on like a telemarketer when her life fell apart. The next few days were a blur of painkillers and nightmares. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the headlights again, that flash of white that meant everything was over. Sometimes I'd wake up screaming. The nurses would rush in, calm me down, whisper that I was safe. But I didn't feel safe. My life had cracked open like the windshield, and no one was coming to help put it back together. On the fourth night, Caroline brought me a cup of lukewarm coffee and sat beside me during her break. She told me she'd grown up in Ohio, worked 3 jobs to put herself through nursing school, and hadn't spoken to her own parents in 10 years. "Family isn't always blood," she said. "Sometimes it's the people who show up when everything goes wrong." I nodded, staring at the coffee steam rising in the dim light. "I don't have anyone who'd show up," I said. "You do now," she said softly, and for a moment, I almost believed her. By the end of the week, the police still hadn't found the truck driver. My parents hadn't called again. The hospital bills were already stacking up, $18,000 and counting, and my savings account had barely $312 left. I felt like the universe was trying to erase me. But lying there, broken and forgotten, something in me hardened. I realized no one was coming to save me. Not the police, not my parents, not some miracle. It had to be me. If I was going to get out of that hospital, pay those bills, and find my way back to living, I'd have to do it on my own. That night, I stared out the window at the city lights flickering across the wet streets and whispered to myself, "You're still here, Lily. And that has to count for something." I didn't know then how much that small promise would change the rest of my life. Leaving the hospital felt less like freedom and more like stepping out of a dream I hadn't asked for. My legs still ached, the right one wrapped tight in bandages, and every step sent a sharp reminder of the crash up through my hip. The nurse, Caroline, hugged me before I left and slipped $50 into my pocket when she thought I wouldn't notice. "For groceries," she said with a wink. I wanted to protest, but the truth was I needed it. My insurance had covered some of the hospital bills, but not all. The rest, nearly $6,000, would follow me like a shadow. When I walked out of St. Mary's Hospital, the air felt colder, the sky gray as slate. I didn't know where to go. My parents hadn't called, and I didn't have the heart to call them again. My apartment lease in Boise, Idaho, had expired while I was in the hospital, and the landlord had already rented it out. He'd been kind enough to mail me a box of my things, a few clothes, my old college notebooks, and a photo of me and my parents at the Grand Canyon when I was 12. I looked so small then, grinning like I believed they loved me. I took a bus to Eugene, Oregon because it was far enough to feel new, but close enough that I didn't feel completely lost. I found a tiny basement room for rent through a bulletin board ad at a grocery store. The walls were damp, the window faced an alley, and the mattress was older than me, but it was $300 a month, utilities included. The landlord, Mrs. Collins, was an older widow who didn't ask questions. "Just pay on time," she said, "and keep it quiet." That seemed fair enough. The first few days, I slept a lot. My body still hurt, my ribs still clicked when I breathed too deep, and sometimes I'd wake up gasping, thinking I was back in the car. Nights were the hardest. Every sound in the old house seemed to echo. I could hear footsteps upstairs, the ticking of pipes, the wind scratching at the window. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about how easily life had split into before and after. I found work 2 weeks later at a small thrift shop on 7th Avenue called Second Chance Treasures. It felt fitting. The owner, Martha James, was a stout woman in her 60s with silver hair and an attitude that didn't tolerate excuses. "You don't have to lift the heavy stuff," she told me when she noticed my limp. "Just run the register, tag donations, and smile at the customers." Smiling makes people buy things they don't need. The pay wasn't much, $12 an hour, part-time, but it was enough for groceries and rent. Some days I'd earn a few tips from customers who noticed I was still recovering. I'd count the money every night, stacking the bills neatly in a jar by my bedside. When I reached $200, I allowed myself to buy a second-hand coat from the shop. It was navy blue, wool, and too big for me, but it made me feel safe. Even with work, the loneliness crept in like fog. I didn't have friends in Eugene. I didn't have anyone really. Sometimes, after closing, I'd walk down to Riverside Park, sit on a bench, and watch the lights ripple across the Willamette River. People passed by, couples holding hands, joggers with headphones, parents pushing strollers, all of them belonging somewhere. I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of their world. I tried calling my parents once, maybe a month after the crash. The line rang 6 times before the voicemail picked up. I didn't leave a message. What was I supposed to say? Hi, it's Lily, your freeloader daughter, the one who didn't die after all. I laughed bitterly and hung up. Still, I couldn't stop hoping they might reach out. Every time my phone buzzed, I'd snatch it up, heart racing, but it was always a wrong number, a spam text, or the bank reminding me of overdue payments. I'd delete the messages, curl up under my too-thin blanket, and whisper to myself that maybe they'd call tomorrow. It wasn't all dark, though. Martha, for all her gruffness, started to look out for me. She'd bring me leftovers from her lunches, turkey sandwiches, slices of apple pie, sometimes even homemade soup in an old mason jar. "You're too thin," she'd say, handing them over. "You need strength to keep standing." I didn't realize, until much later, how much those small acts meant. They were the first real kindness I'd received in months. One afternoon, I was restocking a shelf when a police officer walked in. For a split second, my heart stopped. I thought it might be about the accident. But it wasn't Officer Lopez. It was a younger man named Ethan Harris, just buying a used toaster. Still, seeing that uniform brought the memories rushing back. The sirens, the lights, the pain. He must have noticed the way I froze because he said softly, "You okay, ma'am?" "I'm fine," I said quickly, though my hands were trembling. He smiled gently. "You sure? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I've seen worse," I said, and he laughed, not mockingly but kindly. When he left, he said, "Take care of yourself, all right?" It was such a simple thing, but it stayed with me all day. That night, I walked home slower than usual, letting the cold air sting my face. For the first time since the accident, I felt a tiny spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the kind that fixes everything, but the quiet kind that whispers maybe you're not done yet. 2 months passed like that. Work, walk, sleep, repeat. The scars on my body began to fade, but the ones inside stayed sharp. Some mornings I'd wake up convinced I'd dreamed it all, until I saw the faint pink line running across my collarbone, or the hospital bill folded on my nightstand. Then one evening the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. I was folding clothes on my bed, the radio humming softly in the background. The number was familiar, Denver area code. My stomach dropped. I took a deep breath and pressed accept. "Hello." "Lily." It was my mother's voice, sharp, brisk, the same as always. For a second, I felt like a child again, desperate to say the right thing. "Mom," I whispered. "Why isn't the loan being paid?" she snapped. I froze. "What loan?" "The student loan," she said, as if it were obvious. "You're still using our names, and the bank says payments are overdue. We're not covering your mistakes again, Lily. You need to start taking responsibility." My throat went dry. "I was in an accident," I said quietly. "You knew that." I almost died. There was a pause. Then she sighed, long and impatient. "Well, you didn't, did you? So fix it." The line clicked dead. I sat there for a long time, the silence ringing in my ears. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. Instead, I stood, opened my wallet, and stared at the $50 bill Caroline had given me. I thought about all the people who had shown me more kindness in 2 months than my parents had in a lifetime. That night, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't call them again. I wouldn't beg for love that was never coming. I'd build something new, something that belonged only to me. Even if it took years, even if it started with nothing but $50 and a secondhand coat. It had been 2 months since the accident. 2 long, quiet months of healing, counting dollars, and teaching myself how to breathe again. Life had settled into a kind of rhythm, the kind that felt both fragile and real. I'd wake up to the sound of Mrs. Collins watering her roses upstairs, make instant coffee in my chipped mug, and walk the 15 minutes to Second Chance Treasures, the thrift shop that had become my second home. Work wasn't glamorous, but it gave my days a shape. I'd dust shelves, sort clothes, and chat with Martha, who had become more like a mother to me than the woman who'd given birth to me ever was. Martha would hum old country songs while tagging donations, her voice rough but warm. "You've got a good spirit, Lily," she told me once. "I can see it, even when you don't." I didn't know what she meant then, but I think I do now. Spirit isn't about what you've got. It's what you don't lose, even when life takes everything else. Still, some nights, the ghosts of my old life crept back in. The sound of rain would remind me of the crash. A mother and daughter shopping together would make my chest ache. I'd go home, count the bills in my jar. Always just enough, never more, and wonder what my parents were doing. Were they still on their endless cruises, laughing over champagne, pretending I didn't exist? Or had they already replaced me with silence? I told myself I didn't care. But when my phone rang one evening and I saw the Denver area code, my hands trembled anyway. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. "Hello?" "Lily." My mother's voice came sharp and cold. Finally. My throat tightened. "Hi, Mom." "Don't hi me," she snapped. "Why hasn't the loan been paid?" I blinked. "What loan?" "The student loan, Lily. $15,000. The one you begged us to co-sign for. The bank called today. They said it's been 2 months without payment. Are you spending all your money again?" Her words hit like ice water. "Mom, I was in a car accident. I almost died. The hospital bills." "Don't start with excuses," she interrupted. "You always have a story, don't you? Always some tragedy. Always someone else's fault. When are you going to grow up?" I stood there, silent, the phone pressed to my ear. My chest felt hollow, like everything inside had been scooped out. "Mom," I whispered, "I called you from the hospital. You told me it would be good if I disappeared. Do you even remember saying that?" There was a pause, not of guilt, but of annoyance. Then she sighed. "You took that seriously? Honestly, Lily, you've always been dramatic." I almost laughed. It wasn't the kind of laugh that feels good. It was the broken kind, the kind that sounds like it might turn into a scream. "You don't have to worry about the loan," I said, forcing my voice steady. "I'll figure it out." "You'd better," she said coldly. "Your father, and I won't be cleaning up after you again." And just like that, the line went dead. I stood in the middle of my room, staring at the cheap wallpaper peeling by the window, my hands shaking. I wasn't angry, not really. Anger would have meant I still cared. What I felt instead was something heavier, deeper. It was grief, but not for what I lost, for what I never had. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my tiny desk with a notebook, writing down numbers. My savings, $280. My rent, $300 a month. The loan, $15,000. The math was merciless. Still, I made a plan. I'd pick up extra shifts at the thrift shop, maybe clean houses on weekends. I'd send $50 a month to the bank. It wasn't much, but it was something, a promise to myself, not to them. The next morning, I told Martha I needed more hours. She didn't ask why. She just nodded. "I've been thinking about opening earlier," she said. "You can take the morning shift. It's yours if you want it." I wanted to hug her, but I just smiled. "Thank you," I said. The days got longer, the nights quieter. I worked 6 days a week, sometimes 7, saving every spare dollar I could. I learned to stretch food, rice, beans, eggs. I sold the few things I'd brought from Boise. An old TV, a pair of heels I'd never wear again, a gold bracelet Daniel had given me once when he thought love could fix everything. I got 50 pounds for it at a pawn shop, and I didn't even flinch handing it over. For the first time in my life, I wasn't depending on anyone. Not my parents, not an ex-boyfriend, not luck. Just me. It was terrifying, and it was freedom. One evening, just before closing, a customer came in, Ethan Harris, the police officer who'd bought the toaster weeks before.
He smiled when he saw me.
"Hey, it's the brave one," he said. I laughed softly. I'm not sure about brave. More like stubborn. "Same thing if you ask me," he said, resting an elbow on the counter. "Have you been holding up?" It was such a simple question, but it caught me off guard. No one had asked me that in months. "Better," I said truthfully. Still learning how to breathe. He nodded, his expression kind. That's all anyone can do. He bought a small lamp that didn't even work, just to make conversation. When he left, I realized I was smiling, genuinely smiling, for the first time since the crash. That night, walking home through the quiet streets, I thought about how strange it was that kindness from strangers could heal wounds your family never cared to touch. The next morning, a letter came in the mail. My name was scrawled across the envelope in my mother's handwriting. For a moment, my heart fluttered. Maybe it was an apology. Maybe she'd finally realized what she'd done. I tore it open with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It wasn't an apology. It was a bank notice she'd forwarded, with a sticky note attached. "Handle your own mess." I stared at it for a long time, then laughed. Not bitterly this time, but softly, almost with relief. Because that was the moment I knew I was done. Done begging for love. Done waiting for people who'd already decided I didn't matter. That weekend, I sold what little I owned that could fit into 2 suitcases. Martha found me packing after my shift and raised an eyebrow. "Where you headed, girl?" "I don't know," I said, smiling faintly. "Maybe east. Maybe south. Somewhere new." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Wherever you go, make it yours." She reached into her register, pulled out a $100 bill, and pressed it into my hand. "For the road." I wanted to protest, but she gave me that look. The one that said don't argue, with kindness. That night, I booked a one-way bus ticket to Nashville, Tennessee, for $186. I didn't know what I'd do when I got there, but I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't look back. When I stepped onto the bus at dawn, the air smelled like rain again, but this time, I wasn't afraid. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass and whispered to myself, "You're still here, Lily. And now you're finally free." The city lights faded behind me, and the road stretched out ahead like a promise. For the first time in my life, I believed in that promise because it was mine. Nashville felt different the moment I arrived. Warmer, alive, full of second chances. I found work at a small cafe downtown, where the owner, Martha Lee, reminded me of the one I'd left behind. The first time I sang softly while cleaning tables, a customer tipped me $20 and said, "You've got a story in your voice." In that moment, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, rebuilding myself one breath, one note, one sunrise at a time. I still had scars, but they no longer defined me. For the first time, I belonged to myself.